Let's set the record straight about what is anterior to posterior corrections and what is not. Basically, for those of you who are new to this field of research, the body does not like to be pushed forward or collapse into flexion. As it turns out, that is detrimental to your health, and it explains a lot of negative things that happen to our bodies. It is important to understand that the body does not respond well to being over-rotated, rotated at high velocity, or rotated and then subjected to excessive pressure to achieve over-rotation. Therefore, it is crucial to avoid over-rotation, over-flexing, and overextending the body. This will become clearer as we delve deeper into the subject. All of these negative forces will cause the body to collapse into a stuck position from which it cannot recover on its own. This results in different pathological shapes in people that can vary from person to person, but the cause of this pathological shape is the same in everyone's body. They are always the result of some key area in the body becoming collapsed. People's bodies will contort into different positions to cope with and counterbalance against the collapse. Essentially, this is what occurs. A key structural foundational area of the body collapses as it gets somehow pushed out of its optimal position. Areas such as the lumbar and thoracic spine and the rib cage collapse forward into an unstable position. This increases internal pressure and leads to various forms of degeneration, as well as the normal structure of the body becoming twisted and collapsing out of its optimal structural position. So what exactly is it that can push your body into a collapsed pathological condition? Essentially, we all do it to ourselves or through some injury or through things we consider to be therapeutic, because at the time this happens to our bodies, we do not realize that something wrong has been done to our bodies to cause a collapse. Because the effect of pushing your body into a collapsed condition does not always immediately feel like it caused a problem, the negative effects can show up much later. Throughout history, many have attempted to correct structural collapses in the human body by applying force. The problem, however, is that applying force to push the body's structures back into place often leads to further collapse. So the question remains, how can you exert pressure on an already unstable area without worsening the collapse condition? So what has Hydrostructure discovered about fixing these issues without causing more damage? The undeniable truth is that you cannot correct a collapsed area with force alone. It only pushes the structure in the wrong direction, exacerbating the collapse. But wait, isn't hydrostructural also using pressure to correct the body? Yes, this is true. However, the key difference lies in how the corrections are made. Hydrostructural works by utilizing and compressing the hydraulic tissues that exist inside of a person's body. This allows for precision corrections to be made not by simply applying force to the collapsed structures indiscriminately by pushing directly on the area, but rather by coaxing them back into their original position by creating a hydraulic pressure from within the body to make the necessary corrections. Let's look at the physiology of what causes a collapse to occur, and then we can look at the pitfalls of using force to try and correct them. Now, without getting too complicated, there are, in some cases, two phases of a structural collapse. This example you see here is the most extreme phase where the structure has completely collapsed and is in fact broken. See here, that's broken. That's not what we fix. But this is a good example of an extreme collapse. So pause the video and take a look at this broken lumbar and sacrum. We all know what this is called. But the point I want you to think about is very simple about what you are looking at. Notice that the L5 vertebrae has been squashed and misshapen by a lot of pressure. How much pressure do you think it takes to squash a vertebrae like that? And you can see when it finally broke, look at how it collapsed inwardly into the body. So simply put, it's pretty obvious that it collapsed forward. And I say forward for those of you who don't know what you're looking at. This is an X-ray of a person's lower back taken from the side view, so in relation to the body it has collapsed forward is what I mean when I say there is a forward collapse. We can see collapses that occur in people's rib cages as well. Actually, there are two directions that the rib cage can get stuck in, and that collapsing pressure may even be enough to break the ribs in extremely unstable conditions. But it's important to understand that some people's rib cage gets stuck forward and flares out, while others can get stuck forward and it collapses downwards. Now, a lot of the problems we see happening in the rib cage are connected to other collapses that are happening in the thoracic spine, as well as the lumbars. Now, a lot of times when the body gets stuck forward and collapses, you'll see things start to try and balance themselves out by forming these reversal patterns. Basically, things are being pulled backwards into extension in order to try and counterbalance against the collapse forward. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Basically, these collapses that exist in our bodies to some degree or another are the culprits that are responsible for creating an abnormal amount of pressure that is wearing our bodies out at an accelerated rate. If your body was not collapsed in any way, you would have no symptoms, and you would have a surplus of energy to do things with your body like you did when you were young. All the twisting and turning that might occur in the body is just a way that the body has devised to counterbalance and employ countermeasures to deal with the collapsing structures that it can't correct on its own. As bad as it looks, the body is more clever than you might think, as most of these twisty bodies can function better than most of the straight, flat-looking bodies. It is a shame that these lateral compensations are mistakenly advised to undergo harmful surgeries, and hopefully that practice will come to an end as more of this kind of research proves against such practices. Okay, with all of that being said, let's try and oversimplify things as much as we can, so you can have collapses that can cause your body to go into hyperflexion, and it can also compensate backwards as we saw when a reversal is formed. You should have good curves inside of your body, and a reversal curve is probably the worst type of curve to have. Remember that later on as we go deeper into what is actually happening to the body when it gets pushed around by different techniques.
Okay, so probably one of the oldest techniques that people have been using for probably centuries in trying to fix things in the body is massage. So they try and do something by rubbing on the muscular tissues to make corrections in the body or to relax the muscles. And you can see that when you do this type of treatment to someone, you can also get a lot of releasing, cracking sounds, this kind of thing. This happens with massage too, as the direction that they push is straight down.
Now wait a minute. Wouldn't that be pushing the body in the totally wrong direction? As we can see from this body structure that has totally collapsed? And the answer is yes. This happens all the time when people are doing things to their bodies that are pushing them in the wrong direction. The problem is that it is not well known that this type of pressure pushing down on your body's structures is actually not any good for you. In fact, it's really bad for you. But it feels good, man. That's why telling people that massage is bad for your health, people tend to not take it very seriously. We can think of a lot of things that feel good but are actually bad for us. Even food can taste good but be bad for our health. The problem with pushing your body's structure the wrong way is the damage can be permanently stuck unless you get it corrected.
Of course, there can be even more dangerous forms of massage, such as back walking and these types of very heavy massages. They tend to do a lot more damage, and they can really collapse someone's rib cage. I mean, you can see after they did this back walking treatment that their chest cavity is totally flared out and stuck in the wrong position. Now, maybe they have some kind of drugged effect, but this is definitely not good for your health. Yet another dangerous form of body correction is, they take a hammer and a chisel and they whack you in the back with it. This is also very dangerous.
There's a critical need to stop forcing bodies with lateral curves to be straight. These curves exist for a reason. They counterbalance underlying structural collapses in the body. Until the root cause of the collapse is addressed, the lateral curves are necessary to compensate for it. This is why attempts to force the spine into a straight position often leave people feeling worse, not better. If you force the lateral curves straight, you always will collapse the person's body more. The repeated failures of these outdated methods make it clear. Trying to force lateral spinal curves to be straightened out is a treatment that belongs in a museum, not in modern clinical practice. So these methods should be seen for what they are: outmoded and unscientific mistakes that contribute to the body's collapse, not legitimate therapies. You can't force the body into alignment by whacking it with a hammer, flattening someone's back with brute force, or tying it up with ropes. In fact, continuing with such aggressive approaches is more likely to create health problems than solve them.
Okay, we're going to adjust your mid-back. All right, one more time, Courtney. Keep it with it. Blow it all the way out.
All right, so what about pushing straight down on the back like this? What does that do to the body?
Well, it does a lot of things. It makes a lot of cracking noises. But mainly what it does is it collapses the body even more. Also, what happens because the person's ribs are on the table as the person pushes down on their back is that force usually forces the spine into a reversal, which is pathological, and it also collapses the rib cage down as well at the same time. It is pretty common to see someone get this done to them, and afterwards they can barely breathe and are gasping for air because the force of getting pushed the wrong way has knocked the wind out of them. This is the kind of reaction people get when they fall on their back and injure themselves. Doing this to an older body will probably result in the dislocation of their ribs, if not the outright fracturing of them.
So because they're having a lot of problems with people, getting the wind knocked out of them by someone pushing real hard on the back of them, they decided that they were going to invent this little contraption here, and they'll tell you that this is a much more safer and gentler approach to correcting your back than getting someone to push real fast on your back. And considering that this thing is putting 1,000 newtons of force into your body, it's probably, especially because you're pushing in the direction that the body collapses in, it's probably doing more damage than having someone push on your back. So it actually turns out this is probably more dangerous than, the manual approach. Okay, so what about these so-called anterior to posterior adjustments that people do? And you can see this guy did that, and there's a lot of cracking noises, and seems fine, right? But actually, if you're going to call this anterior to posterior, you got it all wrong, because that's not the way things are moving. It's pretty much similar to flipping somebody over on their stomach and pushing on their back as far as what's happening. Now, there's a couple other things that happen that are different, and that's true, but wherever you put your hand and you squash into it, that's going to collapse the person at that point under your hand. Not only that, it's going to collapse their rib cage as well. Now you have these other techniques out there that are claiming to be A to P adjustment techniques. That's anterior to posterior adjustments. But when you look at what they're actually doing, you realize they're making several mistakes. One is they're pushing through the arms and the chest, which does a lot of negative stuff to the body at that area. And what they're doing is they're basically lifting the person's chest cavity up and rolling it over the back of their hand, which ends up putting the person into extension. And once that extension happens, all of a sudden stuff starts to move. And it's not moving anterior to posterior, it's moving the other direction. It's moving posterior to anterior. And I'm not sure if people who have been taught to do things this way actually realize that's what's happening. If you look at my hand, right, and you have these joints here that you want to push back, right, like that, and they're stuck forward. What they're doing is they're putting their hand here, and then they're taking their body and they're pushing it, and it's going crack, but it's moving P to A. It's moving posterior to anterior. That's why they have to lift the chest up, have their hand here, and then they push it the wrong way. it makes a big crack. And then they just say, well, if you push real hard, of course the person's going to hurt worse and they're going to have more symptoms. So they're like, the only solution is, oh, we'll push gently. I mean, that hurts my hand just pushing it the wrong way, right? But if you're here and you get them down like this and you push at the right angle, it'll push this off. So it'll be stuck forward like this, and then you push it back like that. But see, my fingers need to be down in order for that to happen. So if you stand the person up and then you put them into extension and you got them like this, you're pushing their body in the wrong direction. See, you're pushing them in the wrong direction. And that's called posterior to anterior adjustment, right? And I put a video there that shows you, if you want to do posterior to anterior adjustment, there's an easier way to do that than putting them up against the wall. And here's their arms and their chest. You got to lift it up and push them into the wall and then push these bones the wrong way. I mean, if you want to push them the wrong way, it's easy to do. You can just lay them on the table, put their shoulders like that, and push down with your fingertips. And it'll make the same cracking noise that you make up against the wall doing that. It's the exact same crack noise, and it's going in the exact same direction. But if you want to do a true anterior to posterior, you have to get their body into a flexion. And from flexion, you figure out how to move it from there. Otherwise, you're just doing posterior to anterior adjustments. And you might as well be doing traditional chiropractic or massage. If you want to do it like that, fine, but just call it what it is. This is posterior to anterior adjusting. This is not anterior to posterior adjusting. Because the way you do anterior to posterior is you have to keep the person in flexion, right? If you put them into extension, you're doing something else, right? And I don't know why they do this like this on the wall, because you could do it much easier on a table. This is a traditional chiropractic technique. This is some Russian guy online doing it. But you see, they keep her arms on the table, so you don't have to push with your body on their arms and their chest. See, and she's already up in that extension position, basically. So you don't have to stand in front of them and do all that work. Just tiring. Just lay them on the table. Okay. Then let's listen here.
Отлично. Смотри вперед на Lamborghini или Lamborghini.
All right.
Я
He
вижу
just takes
только
his
пол.
fingertips. Crack. Yeah. See what's happening there, guys? Extension. He's putting them into extension. These are extension techniques. This is not A to P. This is extension posterior to anterior manipulation. And if you want to do it, just do it like this. Put them on the table. Get their arms like that. Why do you have to waste all this energy? Getting them up against the wall, pushing them into extension. This is hard work, just to get the same. I mean, look, this guy uses his fingertips, basically, and everybody talks about in these techniques, oh, you got to do it gentle, oh, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, this is way more gentle. First, it's important to understand that these extension techniques are not A to P adjustments. More importantly, they won't resolve the underlying issue you see here. Many people's bodies experience these reversals, and using this technique will only amplify them. While pushing harder might collapse the reversal further, even a gentler approach won't correct it. Though it might seem like you're causing fewer problems by being gentle, you're still not addressing the core issue. You're merely prolonging it rather than solving it. The first thing you must understand when addressing body collapses is that simply applying pressure to the area near the collapse won't realign it. In fact, this approach often results in further collapse, not correction. When you apply pressure incorrectly, especially by lifting the body into extension and pushing against your hand, you're forcing the body in the wrong direction. A proper A to P, anterior to posterior, correction doesn't involve exerting pressure through the person's elbows, arms, or rib cage into your hand. This is the common mistake nearly everyone makes. True correction happens internally. The key isn't external force, but creating internal hydraulic pressure within the body that pushes on the vertebral structures from the inside out. guiding them back into their natural position. No amount of external pushing can achieve this. If you've ever thought you were making the correct adjustments but weren't seeing results, this is why. When done properly, body therapies can be transformative, almost like a life extension technology. But instead of collapsing the body from the outside in, you need to restore it by working from the inside out. By harnessing internal pressure, you can correct the structural misalignment and restore the body's balance without the risk of causing more harm.